To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Rob Sullivan adjusted his silk tie and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office overlooking downtown Seattle. At 45, he commanded one of the most successful private security consulting firms on the West Coast. His clients ranged from tech billionaires to foreign diplomats, all seeking the expertise that only a former Army intelligence officer could provide. Rob's journey to this pinnacle hadn't been easy. Born to a working-class family in rural Oregon, he'd clawed his way through the ranks of military intelligence, spending 12 years in some of the world's most dangerous places. His specialty had been psychological operations and information warfare, skills that translated remarkably well to the corporate world. When he founded Sullivan Security Consulting 8 years ago, he'd built it on a simple principle: knowledge is power, and power properly applied can move mountains. The mahogany desk behind him held framed photos of his family. Diana, his wife of 18 years, smiled back at him from their wedding day, radiant in white, her auburn hair cascading over bare shoulders. Next to it sat a more recent photo of their children: Michael, 20, a junior at Stanford studying business, and Jennifer, 17, a senior at Seattle's most prestigious private academy. Rob had provided them with everything: the sprawling estate in Bellevue, designer clothes, elite educations, and summer homes in the Hamptons. Diana drove a white Range Rover, wore Cartier jewelry, and lunched with Seattle's social elite. Michael's college fund alone was worth nearly $1 million, carefully invested and structured through multiple trusts. Jennifer's was even larger, as Rob had learned from his early mistakes with money management. But success had a price. The long hours building his empire, the frequent travel, the classified nature of much of his work, it had created distance. Diana had complained about feeling neglected, about his cold demeanor. She craved attention, admiration, the thrill of being desired. Rob had dismissed these as the complaints of a spoiled woman who'd forgotten what struggle looked like. He should have paid closer attention. The secure phone on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Sullivan, your wife called. She's moved the dinner reservation to 8:30. His assistant Miranda informed him. Rob frowned. The anniversary dinner at Lou Bernardine, Diana had been excited about it for weeks. Moving it later seemed odd, but he'd learned not to question his wife's social machinations. She navigated Seattle's high society with the skill of a diplomat, and these dinners were as much about maintaining their status as celebrating their marriage. "Thank you, Miranda. Also, can you pull the quarterly reports on our residential security contracts? I want to review them before tomorrow's board meeting." As Miranda's heels clicked away down the marble hallway, Rob turned back to the window. The Space Needle pierced the gray Seattle sky like a spear, and beyond it, Elliott Bay stretched toward the Olympic Mountains. He'd conquered this city through sheer force of will and strategic thinking. Every move had been calculated, every relationship leveraged for maximum advantage. It was a philosophy that had never failed him in business. He was about to learn that family operated by different rules entirely. Chapter 2, The Discovery. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Rob's encrypted phone, the one only his highest priority clients used, vibrated against the nightstand. Diana mumbled something incoherent and rolled away as he slipped out of bed and into his study. "Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, this is Agent Chun with the Seattle FBI. We need to discuss a matter involving your security clearance and some irregularities we've discovered." Rob's blood chilled. His government contracts required the highest level of clearance, and any irregularities could destroy everything he'd built. "What kind of irregularities?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the Federal Building downtown? 7th floor, Conference Room B. Come alone." The drive downtown took 25 minutes through empty streets. Rob's mind raced through possibilities. Had one of his employees compromised classified information? Had a client been feeding intelligence to foreign agents? The FBI didn't make 2 a.m. calls for minor infractions. Agent Chun was younger than Rob expected, maybe 35, with the kind of intense focus that marked career intelligence officers. She sat across from him at a metal table with a manila folder and a tablet. "Mr. Sullivan, what I'm about to show you is personal in nature. but it's become a security concern due to your clearance level and the sensitivity of your contracts. She slid the tablet across the table. The screen showed a hotel room, clearly filmed from a hidden camera. Rob's chest tightened as he recognized the woman on the bed. Diana, his wife of 18 years, naked and writhing beneath a man who definitely wasn't him. This was taken 6 weeks ago at the Olympic Hotel, Chun continued. The man is Trevor Hartwell, a real estate developer with known ties to several foreign investment groups that are of interest to us. Rob's hands remained steady as he watched his marriage disintegrate on the small screen. Years of military training had taught him to compartmentalize, to process devastating information without losing operational effectiveness. But inside, something fundamental was breaking apart. How long has this been going on? His voice was calmer than he felt. Our surveillance indicates approximately 8 months. Mr. Hartwell has been using these relationships to gain access to properties and information that could compromise national security. Your wife has been helpful in providing details about your client list and current contracts. Rob's jaw tightened. Diana knew the names of several foreign diplomats and tech executives under his protection. She'd attended enough dinner parties and social functions to piece together sensitive information that, in the wrong hands, could be catastrophic. What else? Agent Chen hesitated. Your children, Mr. Sullivan. They've been in contact with Mr. Hartwell as well. He's been generous with them. Private shopping trips, expensive gifts, promises of internships and business opportunities. Your son Michael has been particularly receptive. The betrayal cut deeper than Rob had thought possible. Not just Diana's infidelity, but his children's complicity in it. Michael and Jennifer had been accepting gifts from the man who was destroying their family, who was potentially compromising national security using their mother as a conduit. What do you need from me? We need you to act normally while we build our case against Hartwell. No confrontations, no changes in behavior that might alert him. Can you do that? Rob nodded. How long? 6 weeks, maybe 8. We're close to having everything we need. As Rob drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, his mind was already working. The FBI wanted to wait 6 to 8 weeks. That was their timeline, their operation, their rules. But Rob had learned long ago that sometimes you had to make your own rules. Sometimes the system wasn't fast enough, wasn't thorough enough, wasn't permanent enough. He'd spent 18 years building a life with Diana, providing for his children, creating what he thought was an unshakable foundation. They'd chosen to betray that foundation, to sell it out for excitement and money and promises from a man who saw them as nothing more than useful tools. Rob pulled into his driveway and sat in the darkness, staring at the house he'd bought for his family. The house where his wife had been planning her betrayal, where his children had been counting money from her lover. He'd given them everything. Now he was going to take it all away. But first, he needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went. Chapter 3: Intelligence Gathering. Rob spent the next 3 weeks playing the perfect husband and father while methodically dissecting his family's betrayal. His military intelligence background served him well. He knew how to gather information without leaving traces, how to monitor communications without detection, and most importantly, how to remain invisible while doing it. The discovery started with Diana's laptop. A simple keylogger installed during one of her shopping trips gave him access to her emails, social media accounts, and text messages. What he found was worse than infidelity. It was a complete destruction of everything he'd thought their marriage represented. Diana's messages to Trevor were filled with mockery of Rob's boring lifestyle, complaints about his emotional distance, and detailed information about his business that she had no right to share. She'd photographed documents in his study, copied client lists, and even recorded conversations she'd overheard during his business calls. But the children's involvement cut deepest. Michael's text thread with Trevor revealed a months-long grooming process. Trevor had started with small gifts, expensive sneakers, concert tickets, a loan for a spring break trip that was never meant to be repaid. Gradually, he positioned himself as a mentor figure, someone who understood Michael's ambitions better than his workaholic father. Jennifer's involvement was more subtle but equally damning. Trevor had hired her for a summer internship at his development company, paying her an obscene amount to do minimal work while pumping her for information about Rob's security clients and their properties. The most devastating discovery came from Diana's deleted emails. In them, She and Trevor discussed their exit strategy, a plan to divorce Rob, take half his assets, and start fresh together. They'd been consulting lawyers, identifying assets, and even discussing ways to implicate Rob in some kind of professional misconduct that would strip him of his security clearances. Rob sat in his study at 3 a.m., surrounded by printed emails and photographs, feeling like an archaeologist excavating the remains of his former life. Every document revealed another layer of betrayal, another careful calculation designed to destroy him. His secure phone buzzed. Agent Chin's name appeared on the encrypted display. "We need to accelerate our timeline," she said without preamble. "Hartwell's gotten suspicious. We think he knows about our surveillance. What's the status of your case?" "Strong enough to proceed, but we could use more evidence. Any chance you can get us additional documentation of your wife's information sharing?" Rob looked at the pile of printed evidence surrounding him. He had enough documentation to bury Diana and Trevor in federal court, but something held him back from sharing it with Agent Chen. Maybe it was his military training telling him to keep his own intelligence assets secure. Maybe it was the knowledge that the federal justice system would be too slow, too merciful, too constrained by laws and procedures. Or maybe it was the cold certainty that had been growing in his chest for 3 weeks. This betrayal required a more personal form of justice. "I'll see what I can do," he told Chen. After ending the call, Rob opened his laptop and began typing. Not a report for the FBI, but something far more comprehensive, a complete dossier on every person who had betrayed him. Diana's psychological profile, her weaknesses, her deepest fears. Trevor's financial structure, his business relationships, his vulnerabilities. Michael's social media presence, his college dependencies, his future plans. Jennifer's ambitions, her insecurities, her trust funds. Knowledge was power. And Rob had spent 3 weeks accumulating the kind of detailed intelligence that most people never bothered to gather about their enemies, let alone their families. The plan that emerged over the following nights was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its thoroughness. Rob would dismantle their lives piece by piece, using their own weaknesses and dependencies against them. The FBI could have Trevor's foreign intelligence activities. Rob would handle the personal betrayals. The first phase would begin with the college fund, Michael's greatest dependency and his pathway to the future Trevor had promised him. The fund had been structured as an irrevocable trust, but Rob had learned long ago that irrevocable was a flexible concept when you knew the right legal mechanisms and had the right connections. Phase 2 would target Diana's social standing and financial security. Her real estate license, her country club memberships, her carefully cultivated reputation among Seattle's elite, all of it built on the foundation of being Mrs. Robert Sullivan. That foundation was about to crumble. Phase 3 would be Trevor himself. Not just his business, but his marriage, his reputation, his future. Rob had discovered that Trevor's wife, Catherine, was completely unaware of the affair, and she happened to be the daughter of one of Seattle's most powerful federal judges. The kind of man who didn't appreciate his family being humiliated by cheap real estate developers. Rob closed his laptop and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. Somewhere in the city, Diana was probably planning her next move against him. Trevor was probably counting the money he thought he'd steal. Michael and Jennifer were probably dreaming of their bright futures funded by their father's destruction. They had no idea that the man they betrayed wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a weapon, forged in the world's most dangerous places and sharpened by years of psychological warfare. And weapons, once aimed, didn't miss their targets. Chapter 4. The First Strike. Rob's first move came on a Thursday morning in November, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. He'd spent 2 weeks setting up the legal framework, using a network of attorneys and financial consultants who specialized in high-stakes asset protection. None of them knew the full scope of his plan. Rob had learned long ago to compartmentalize information even among allies. Michael's college fund existed in a complex trust structure that Rob had designed years earlier to protect it from taxes and potential creditors. But like any good intelligence officer, Rob had built hidden mechanisms into the structure, triggers that could be activated under specific circumstances. Circumstances like the beneficiary engaging in activities that could compromise national security. The call came to Michael's dorm room at Stanford at exactly 9:47 a.m. Pacific time. just as he was finishing his morning economics lecture. "Mr. Sullivan? This is Dean Richardson's office. We need you to come in immediately regarding your financial aid status." Michael's stomach dropped. His financial aid? That was impossible. His father's trust fund covered everything. Room, board, tuition, even his expensive social activities. There had to be some mistake. 20 minutes later, Michael sat across from Dean Richardson's assistant, a stern woman with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke in the flat tones of administrative doom. "Mr. Sullivan, we've received notification from your trust administrator that your education funding has been suspended pending a federal investigation into potential security violations. Effective immediately, your account balance is zero, and your spring semester registration has been canceled." Michael's hands shook as he read the official document. Security violations? Federal investigation? This made no sense. There has to be some mistake. My father would never. The notification came from Sullivan Financial Trust Management, signed by your father as the trust administrator. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan, but unless alternative payment arrangements are made within 30 days, you'll need to withdraw from the university." Michael stumbled out of the administration building in a daze. His phone buzzed with a text from his girlfriend Ashley. "Babe, my dad says there's some FBI thing about your mom and that real estate guy. Call me." Then another text from his sister Jennifer. "Dad knows everything. Trevor's been arrested. Mom's freaking out. What do we do?" Michael tried calling his father's office, but Miranda's voice was coldly professional. "Mr. Sullivan is unavailable and has left instructions not to take calls from family members regarding personal matters." He tried his father's personal cell. It went straight to voicemail. Then he tried his mother. Diana's voice was frantic, barely coherent. "Michael, thank God. Listen to me carefully. Your father has lost his mind. He's destroyed everything. Trevor's been arrested by the FBI. They froze his accounts, and now your father is trying to destroy us too. You need to come home right now." "Mom, what's happening with my college fund?" "They're saying." He triggered some kind of clause, something about security violations. "His lawyers are saying that because Trevor was under investigation, it invalidated the trust." "It's insane, Michael. He's punishing us for something we had nothing to do with." But Michael knew that wasn't entirely true. The gifts from Trevor, the summer job for Jennifer, the inside information they'd shared about their father's business. They'd all known it was wrong, but Trevor made it seem harmless. Exciting. Like they were finally part of something important instead of just the children of a workaholic who never had time for them. Now it was all falling apart. Meanwhile, across Seattle, Diana was discovering that her own world was crumbling with equal precision. Her real estate license was under review by the state board following irregularities in client confidentiality practices. Her membership at the exclusive Rainier Club had been temporarily suspended, pending resolution of unspecified ethical concerns. 3 major social events she'd been planning had been canceled by hosts who suddenly found excuses to exclude her. Most devastating of all, her personal bank accounts had been frozen, not by the government, but by her own bank, acting on instructions from her husband as the primary account holder. The credit cards, the investment accounts, even her access to the household finances, all of it required Rob's signature, and Rob had made it clear through his attorneys that no such signatures would be forthcoming. Trevor's arrest had been swift and thorough. The FBI had raided his offices at dawn, seizing computers, files, and financial records. His wife, Catherine, had learned about the affair from federal agents who'd shown her the hotel surveillance footage as part of their investigation. By noon, she'd filed for divorce and taken their children to her father's estate, where Judge Morrison was reportedly planning a response that would make Trevor's legal troubles seem like minor inconveniences. But Rob's masterstroke was yet to come. At exactly 3:30 p.m., as Diana sat in her empty house, trying to figure out how to pay for groceries without access to credit cards, her phone rang. "Mrs. Sullivan? This is Thomas Morrison, Judge Morrison. I believe you know my daughter, Catherine." Diana's blood went cold. Everyone in Seattle knew Judge Morrison's reputation. Federal appellate court, former prosecutor, the kind of man who'd built his career destroying people who thought they were untouchable. "Judge Morrison, I can explain." "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm not calling for explanations. I'm calling to inform you that my son-in-law's indiscretions have created a very personal problem for my family. My daughter is devastated. My grandchildren are asking why Daddy was on the news. And I've learned that you've been instrumental in facilitating these problems. The line went quiet for a long moment. I want you to understand something, Mrs. Sullivan. Your husband and I had a very interesting conversation this morning. We've reached certain understandings about how this situation will be resolved. I thought you should be aware that your legal options going forward may be somewhat more limited than you might expect. The line went dead. Diana sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been systematically dismantled in less than 8 hours. Outside, her neighbor Mrs. Chun was walking her dog, pointedly avoiding eye contact with the house that had become the center of Seattle's latest scandal. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is just the beginning. You wanted excitement. Now you have it. For the first time since this nightmare began, Diana started to understand exactly who she'd been betraying. Not just a husband, but a man who'd spent 12 years learning how to destroy his enemies without leaving fingerprints. A man who'd built an empire on the principle that information was power, and power properly applied could move mountains. A man who'd just turned that power against his own family. Chapter 5: Psychological Warfare. 3 days after Michael's financial collapse, Rob's campaign entered its second phase. He'd learned during his military service that the most effective warfare was psychological. Breaking an enemy's will to fight was far more efficient than simply attacking their resources. Fear, uncertainty, and isolation could accomplish what brute force never could. Diana discovered this principle firsthand when she attempted to hire a divorce attorney. The first lawyer she contacted, a prominent family law specialist, took her call, but politely declined representation due to potential conflicts of interest. The second attorney did the same. By the fifth rejection, Diana realized that her husband's network extended far deeper into Seattle's legal community than she'd ever understood. Rob had spent 8 years building relationships with judges, prosecutors, and the city's most influential attorneys. His company had provided security consulting for their firms, protected their families during high-profile cases, and handled sensitive investigations that earned him both gratitude and leverage. Now he was calling in those debts. The psychological pressure intensified when Diana received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots of her meeting with Trevor, entering hotel rooms, sharing intimate moments she'd thought were private. But worse than the photos were the documents. Copies of every email she'd sent, every text message, every piece of information she'd shared about Rob's business. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. I know everything. Every betrayal. Every lie. Every secret you think you're keeping. This is your only warning. Diana's hands shook as she read it. The implications were clear. If she tried to fight the divorce, if she attempted to claim half his assets or portray herself as a victim, every piece of evidence would become public. Her affair would be front-page news in the Seattle Times. Her children would see exactly what kind of woman their mother really was. But the note wasn't just a threat. It was psychological torture, designed to make her paranoid about what else Rob might know, what other evidence he might have, what other traps he might have set. Diana found herself checking her phone obsessively, wondering if he was still monitoring her calls. She avoided her usual restaurants and shopping centers, terrified of running into people who might have heard about the scandal. Meanwhile, Jennifer was discovering that her senior year at Seattle Academy had become a nightmare of social humiliation. Her classmates' parents worked in law, finance, and tech, exactly the circles where her father's reputation carried weight and where Trevor's arrest had become gossip fodder. Girls who'd been her best friends suddenly found excuses to avoid her. Teachers who'd once praised her work now treated her with cool professionalism. The final blow came when she was called to the headmaster's office and informed that her irregular employment situation with Hartwell Development had created questions about academic integrity. Her summer internship, which had paid her $15,000 for essentially no work, was being investigated as a potential case of academic fraud. Her early admission to Northwestern was under review. Jennifer tried calling her father, but like Michael, she reached only voicemail. She tried going to his office, but Miranda informed her that Mr. Sullivan was traveling on business and couldn't be reached. The message was clear: she was on her own. Michael, meanwhile, had become a pariah at Stanford. His fraternity brothers, embarrassed by the federal investigation surrounding his family, had quietly suggested he consider taking a leave of absence. His girlfriend Ashley's father, a tech executive who'd done business with Sullivan Security Consulting, had forbidden her from seeing him. The social network Michael had built around his family's wealth and status evaporated overnight. Desperate, Michael drove home to Seattle, planning to confront his father directly. But when he arrived at the family estate, he found his access codes had been changed. The security guard, an employee of his father's company, politely but firmly informed him that he was no longer authorized to enter the property. Standing outside the gates of his childhood home, Michael felt the full weight of his father's power for the first time. This wasn't just anger or disappointment. This was systematic destruction, carried out with military precision by a man who'd spent his career learning how to neutralize threats. That night, Michael called his father's personal cell one more time. To his surprise, Rob answered on the first ring. "Hello, Michael. Dad, please. We need to talk. I know you're angry, but..." "Angry?" Rob's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Michael, I'm not angry. Anger is an emotion. What I'm experiencing is strategic clarity." "What does that mean?" "It means I've identified a problem and I'm solving it. You, your sister, and your mother decided that your loyalty could be purchased. You decided that 18 years of sacrifice on my part was worth less than a few gifts from a man who was using you to destroy me. Those are choices with consequences. Dad, we didn't know. You knew enough. You knew Trevor was my wife's lover. You knew the gifts he was giving you were inappropriate. You knew the information you shared with him was confidential. You made your choices, Michael. Now you get to live with them." The line went quiet for a moment. When Rob spoke again, his voice carried the cold certainty of a man delivering a verdict. "Your college fund has been restructured into a charitable foundation focused on supporting military families. Your access to our family assets has been permanently revoked. Your mother will receive exactly what she's entitled to under our prenuptial agreement, which is considerably less than she anticipated. And all of you will learn what life looks like without the protection of the Sullivan name. Dad, you can't just..." "Michael, I spent 12 years in places where betrayal meant death. I learned to identify threats before they could destroy me. I learned to eliminate those threats completely and permanently. You and your sister and your mother decided to become threats to everything I built. Now you're learning what happens to threats." Rob paused, and when he continued, there was something almost like sadness in his voice. "I gave you everything, Michael. The best education money could buy, every opportunity you could want, a future that most people only dream about. And you traded it all for trinkets from a man who saw you as nothing more than a useful tool. That wasn't just betrayal, it was stupidity. And I don't tolerate either one." The line went dead. Michael stood in his dorm room, staring at his phone, finally understanding that this wasn't a family argument that could be resolved with apologies and time. This was war, declared by a man who'd spent his entire adult life learning how to win wars completely and permanently. And Michael was just beginning to understand how thoroughly he'd chosen the losing side. Chapter 6: The Web Titans. By December, Rob's psychological campaign had achieved its intended effect. His family was isolated, financially desperate, and beginning to turn on each other as the pressure mounted. Diana had moved into a studio apartment in Capitol Hill, forced to work as a receptionist at a small real estate office after her license was suspended. Jennifer had withdrawn from Seattle Academy and was working at a coffee shop, her Northwestern admission officially rescinded. Michael had dropped out of Stanford and returned to Seattle, sharing his mother's cramped apartment and working nights at a warehouse. But Rob wasn't finished. The third phase of his plan required patience and careful timing, because it involved not just his family, but the man who'd orchestrated their betrayal. Trevor Hartwell was discovering that federal charges were only the beginning of his problems. His real estate empire, built on leveraged investments and foreign partnerships, was collapsing under FBI scrutiny. His wife, Catherine, had not only filed for divorce, but had retained the most vicious family law attorney in the Pacific Northwest, a woman known for leaving her opponents financially and emotionally destroyed. More devastatingly, Judge Morrison had begun using his considerable influence to ensure that Trevor's legal troubles extended far beyond the original federal charges. Banking relationships that had taken years to build were suddenly terminated. City permits for ongoing construction projects were mysteriously delayed by bureaucratic complications. Investors who'd trusted Trevor with millions were filing civil suits that would tie up his assets for years. But Rob's masterstroke was more personal. Through his intelligence network, he'd learned that Trevor had been running the same seduction scheme for years, targeting wealthy married women, using their information for his business advantage, then discarding them when they became liabilities. Diana wasn't his first victim. She was just the most recent. Rob compiled evidence of Trevor's previous affairs, complete with photos, financial records, and communications. Then he systematically contacted every woman Trevor had betrayed, offering them the evidence they needed to file their own lawsuits. 7 women came forward, each with devastating stories of manipulation and fraud. The collective weight of these revelations destroyed what remained of Trevor's reputation. Seattle's social circles, already buzzing with gossip about the FBI investigation, turned completely against him. He became a pariah, unable to show his face at the clubs and restaurants where he'd once conducted business. Trevor's desperation led him to make a critical mistake. He contacted Diana, suggesting they could work together to minimize their legal problems. He proposed that Diana testify on his behalf, portraying their relationship as a genuine romance rather than a calculated manipulation. In return, he'd help her find legal representation to fight Rob's divorce terms. Diana, financially desperate and socially isolated, agreed to meet him at a small restaurant outside the city. What she didn't know was that Rob had been monitoring Trevor's communications through FBI channels, and he knew about the meeting before it happened. The restaurant Trevor chose was one that Rob's company had installed security systems for 6 months earlier, systems that included sophisticated audio recording capabilities. The conversation that took place between Diana and Trevor was captured in perfect digital clarity. During their meeting, Trevor revealed the full scope of his manipulation. He admitted that he'd targeted Diana specifically because of Rob's security clearances and client list. He detailed how he'd used the information she provided to manipulate real estate deals and investment opportunities. Most damningly, he described their affair as a business arrangement that had simply gotten complicated when the FBI became involved. Diana, already emotionally fragile from months of psychological pressure, broke down during the conversation. She admitted that she'd never loved Trevor, that she'd been flattered by his attention and excited by the danger of the affair. She revealed that she'd always resented Rob's success, felt diminished by it, and wanted to prove she could be important in her own right. The recording was a perfect encapsulation of everything Rob had suspected about their betrayal. It wasn't love or passion that had driven Diana's affair, it was vanity, greed, and a fundamental disrespect for everything he'd sacrificed to provide for their family. Rob made copies of the recording and delivered them strategically. One went to the FBI as evidence in their case against Trevor. Another went to Catherine's divorce attorney, providing devastating ammunition for her proceedings. A third went to the Seattle Times reporter who'd been covering the federal investigation, ensuring that the most humiliating details would become public record. But the fourth copy went directly to Michael and Jennifer, delivered with a note that read, "This is what your mother really thinks of our family. This is what the man you chose to trust really thinks of you. I want you to understand exactly what you were defending when you betrayed me." The recording devastated what remained of the family's unity. Michael and Jennifer, already struggling with the consequences of their choices, were forced to confront the reality that their mother's affair hadn't been a romantic mistake, but a calculated betrayal of everything their father had built. They began to understand that Trevor had never cared about them personally. They'd been useful tools in his manipulation of Diana, nothing more. Jennifer, in particular, was crushed by the realization that her internship had been a payoff designed to keep her complicit in the scheme. The $15,000 she'd been paid wasn't recognition of her abilities. It was hush money, designed to make her an accomplice in her father's destruction. As winter deepened into spring, Rob's campaign reached its inevitable conclusion. Trevor pled guilty to federal charges and was sentenced to 8 years in prison, his fortune completely destroyed by legal fees and civil settlements. Catherine's divorce settlement left him with nothing but debt and disgrace. Diana's divorce was finalized in March, granting her exactly what the prenuptial agreement specified: $50,000 and no claim to Rob's business or properties. Her attempts to portray herself as a victim were undermined by the restaurant recording, which had become public knowledge throughout Seattle's legal and social communities. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. Michael, desperate and financially ruined, made one final attempt to reconcile with his father. He'd grown up believing that family bonds were unbreakable, that eventually love would overcome anger, that his father's wealth and success made him invulnerable to the kind of permanent consequences that destroyed other families. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. Chapter 7. The Final Gambit. Spring brought no mercy for the Sullivan family. Michael's situation had become desperate. Kicked out of Stanford, unable to afford to return, working a minimum-wage warehouse job while living in his mother's studio apartment. He'd applied to community colleges but couldn't afford even their modest tuition without financial aid. His applications for student loans were rejected due to his family's previous wealth, which created the assumption that parental support was available. Jennifer's situation was equally dire. Without her Northwestern admission, she was facing the prospect of starting over at a community college while working at the coffee shop to help pay their rent. The prestigious life she'd grown up expecting, elite education, social connections, financial security, had evaporated completely. Diana was working 60-hour weeks at the real estate office, making barely enough to cover their basic expenses. The woman who'd once lunched at the Rainier Club and spent thousands on designer clothes was now clipping coupons and shopping at discount stores. In desperation, Michael decided to make one final attempt to reach his father. Not through intermediaries or formal channels, but directly, a personal confrontation that would force Rob to acknowledge the devastation he'd caused. Michael spent weeks planning his approach. He knew his father's routines, his office schedule, his security protocols. On a Thursday afternoon in April, he waited in the parking garage beneath Sullivan Security Consulting, knowing that Rob always stayed late on Thursdays to review weekly reports. When Rob emerged from the elevator at 8:30 p.m., Michael was waiting beside his car. "Hello, Dad." Rob showed no surprise at seeing his son. His expression remained neutral, professional, as if Michael were a stranger requesting directions. "Michael, we need to talk." "No, we don't." Rob clicked his key fob, and the car doors unlocked. "You made your choices. I made mine. There's nothing left to discuss." "Dad, please. Look what you've done to us. Mom's working as a receptionist. Jennifer's making coffee for minimum wage. I'm living in a studio apartment, working at a warehouse. You've destroyed your own family." Rob paused with his hand on the door handle. When he turned back to Michael, his eyes were cold as winter steel. "I didn't destroy my family, Michael. My family destroyed itself. I provided everything you could possibly want: education, opportunities, financial security, social connections. And you traded all of it for trinkets from a man who was using you to destroy me. We didn't know. You knew enough." Rob's voice cut through Michael's protests like a blade. "You knew Trevor was sleeping with your mother. You knew the gifts he was giving you were inappropriate. You knew you were keeping secrets from me. You made those choices because they felt good in the moment, because they made you feel important and special." Michael's face flushed with anger and desperation. "So what? You're going to punish us forever? We're your children, Dad. Your family. You were my family." Rob's voice was quiet but implacable. Family doesn't betray each other for money and excitement. Family doesn't sell out their father's life work for the approval of a stranger. Family doesn't choose their mother's lover over their father's sacrifice. We were kids. We made mistakes. You were adults. Michael, you're 20 years old. You understood exactly what you were doing when you took Trevor's money and shared our family's private information with him. You understood what you were doing when you lied to me about your relationship with him. You chose his side because you thought he offered you a better deal." Rob opened his car door, then paused again. "You want to know what the real tragedy is, Michael? It's not that you betrayed me. It's that you betrayed yourselves. You had everything, every advantage, every opportunity, every door opened for you. And you threw it all away for the promise of easy money and excitement from a man who saw you as useful idiots." Michael's desperation boiled over into rage. "You're a monster. You destroyed your own family because your pride got hurt." "My pride?" Rob's laugh was bitter and cold. "Michael, this has nothing to do with pride. This is about consequences. You made choices that could have destroyed my business, my reputation, my freedom. Your mother shared classified information with a foreign agent. You and Jennifer took money that was essentially bribes. Any one of those things could have cost me my security clearances, my government contracts, everything I've spent 20 years building. But we're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix security breaches, Michael. Sorry doesn't restore classified information once it's been compromised. Sorry doesn't undo the damage you caused to national security investigations. Sorry is what children say when they break something valuable. Adults understand that some choices can't be undone. Michael was crying now, the facade of adult sophistication crumbling away to reveal the frightened young man underneath. Dad, please. I'll do anything. I'll make it up to you. Just give me a chance. For a moment, Rob's expression softened almost imperceptibly, but then it hardened again, and when he spoke, his voice carried the finality of a death sentence. Michael, there is no making this up. There is no going back. You chose Trevor Hartwell over your father. You chose easy money over family loyalty. You chose excitement over responsibility. Those weren't mistakes, they were character decisions. And character doesn't change just because consequences arrive. Rob got into his car, then rolled down the window. You want to know what I learned in the military, Michael? I learned that some betrayals are unforgivable not because of the damage they cause, but because of what they reveal about the person who commits them. You, your sister, and your mother showed me exactly who you really are when the stakes got high and the choices got difficult. You showed me that your loyalty could be purchased, that your principles could be compromised, that your family meant less to you than money and excitement from a stranger. The engine started, but Rob didn't drive away immediately. I spent 18 years believing I was raising children who would grow up to be honorable adults. I spent 18 years sacrificing my time, my energy, my resources to give you every advantage I never had. And when the first real test of your character arrived, you failed completely. That's not a mistake, Michael. That's a revelation. Dad, the college fund you're so concerned about? It's been donated to a foundation that supports children of military families. Children whose fathers died serving their country. Children who understand the value of sacrifice and loyalty. Your inheritance has been restructured to benefit people who actually deserve it. And your access to the Sullivan name and everything it represents has been permanently revoked. Michael stepped toward the car, but Rob's voice stopped him cold. Don't follow me, Michael. Don't come to my office again. Don't contact me through intermediaries. You made your choice when you chose Trevor Hartwell's money over your father's trust. Now live with that choice. The car pulled away, leaving Michael alone in the underground garage, finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. His father wasn't just angry or disappointed. He was finished with them. Permanently. Completely. Finally. Outside in the Seattle rain, Michael stood on the sidewalk and made a call he'd been dreading for weeks. Mom? It's over. He's never going to forgive us. We're on our own. Diana's voice on the other end was hollow with defeat. I know, baby. I know. For the first time since this nightmare began, both mother and son understood that they hadn't just lost their comfortable lifestyle. They'd lost their father and patriarch forever. The man who'd built everything they'd taken for granted had written them out of his life with the same methodical precision he'd once used to write them into it. And unlike his business empire, this decision was truly irrevocable. Chapter 8. Consequences and Revelations. 2 months later, the full scope of Rob's victory became clear to anyone who'd been following the scandal. Trevor Hartwell had been transferred to a federal prison in Ohio, where he would serve at least 6 years before being eligible for parole. His wife, Catherine, had remarried, a federal prosecutor from her father's circle, and moved to Washington, D.C. with their children, who would grow up never knowing their biological father's name. Diana's real estate career had ended permanently when her license was revoked following a state investigation into her information-sharing practices. She'd taken a job as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, earning 1/10 of what she'd once spent on a single shopping trip. The studio apartment she shared with her children was a far cry from the Bellevue estate, but it was all they could afford. Jennifer had enrolled in community college, majoring in business administration and working nights at a restaurant to pay for her classes. Her dreams of Northwestern and a prestigious corporate career had been replaced by the harsh reality of working her way up from nothing. The designer clothes and luxury cars of her teenage years were distant memories. Michael had found work as a security guard at a downtown office building, a job he'd obtained by lying about his education and work history. He'd changed his last name to his mother's maiden name, hoping to escape the notoriety that followed the Sullivan scandal. But in a city as connected as Seattle, The truth had a way of catching up. Rob, meanwhile, had emerged from the scandal stronger than ever. The FBI had commended his cooperation in the Hartwell investigation, and his government contracts had been renewed with expanded scope. Sullivan Security Consulting had opened offices in Portland and San Francisco, capitalizing on the reputation for ruthless effectiveness that the family scandal had somehow enhanced rather than damaged. But the most significant development came on a warm afternoon in June, when Rob sat in his office reviewing expansion plans for his company's international division. Miranda's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Sullivan, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's Catherine Morrison Hartwell. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Rob hadn't spoken to Trevor's ex-wife since the investigation concluded. He'd heard about her remarriage through Seattle's social network, but they'd had no direct contact since the early days of the scandal. Catherine entered his office with the same composed dignity she'd shown throughout the divorce proceedings. At 38, she was still strikingly beautiful, but there was a steel in her eyes that hadn't been there before, the kind of strength that came from surviving public humiliation and emerging victorious. "Mrs. Morrison Hartwell, what can I do for you?" "It's Mrs. Morrison now, actually. I remarried." She sat across from his desk with perfect posture, every inch the federal judge's daughter. "I wanted to thank you." Rob raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For destroying Trevor so completely? For making sure he could never hurt another family the way he hurt ours?" Catherine's voice was calm, but there was satisfaction in it. "My father and I have been following his prison experience through channels. He's not adapting well to federal incarceration. I imagine it's quite an adjustment. Robert, may I call you Robert? I know what you did to your family. The financial destruction, the social isolation, the complete cutoff from your support. Most people think you went too far." Rob's expression didn't change. "Do you?" Catherine smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that reminded Rob uncomfortably of his own tactical thinking. "I think you showed remarkable restraint. If I discovered that my children had betrayed me the way yours betrayed you, I'm not sure I would have stopped at financial consequences." She opened her purse and withdrew a business card. "My new husband is David Chun. He's a federal prosecutor specializing in international financial crimes. We've been following your company's work, and David thinks you might be interested in some consulting opportunities with the Justice Department." Rob accepted the card. "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that would expand your security clearances considerably. The kind that would make you even more untouchable than you already are." Catherine stood, smoothing her skirt. "Trevor wasn't the only person running schemes like his, Robert. There are others out there, manipulating vulnerable people, compromising national security for personal gain. David's department needs someone with your particular skill set to help identify and neutralize these threats." "And you're recommending me?" "I'm recommending a man who proved that betrayal has consequences, that justice can be achieved outside the court system, and that some people understand the true value of loyalty and principle." Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. "My father always said that the best revenge is success. You've certainly proven that principle." After she left, Rob sat in his office thinking about the conversation. Catherine was offering him something he'd never expected: validation from someone who understood the true scope of what he'd accomplished. Not just the destruction of his enemies, but the complete reconstruction of his life on his own terms. His family had chosen to betray him, and he'd chosen to excise them from his life like a surgeon removing cancer. It had been brutal, systematic, and permanent, but it had also been necessary. Some violations of trust were so fundamental that forgiveness wasn't just impossible, it was dangerous. Rob looked out at the Seattle skyline, where construction cranes marked the growth of a city that increasingly respected strength over sentiment. His company was thriving, his reputation was unassailable, and his future was entirely his own. He'd learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about loyalty and shared values and mutual respect. The family he'd built through DNA had failed those tests completely. But perhaps, through his work and his principles and his refusal to accept betrayal, he could build something better. Something that would last, because it was based on merit rather than sentiment, on choice rather than accident of birth. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, he wondered if one of his former family members had found a way to contact him despite his security measures. But the message was from Catherine. David would like to meet with you next week about the consulting position. Are you interested in building something that can't be betrayed? Rob typed back a single word. Yes. Outside his window, the sun was setting over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the city, his former wife and children were living with the consequences of their choices. They would never again enjoy the protection of his name, the security of his wealth, or the opportunities his connections could provide. But that was their choice, not his tragedy. They'd gambled everything on the promise of easy money and excitement from a stranger, and they'd lost. Completely. Permanently. Finally, Rob had learned long ago that the world was divided into two types of people: those who understood that actions have consequences, and those who learned that lesson too late to save themselves. His family had chosen which type they wanted to be. Now they were living with that choice. Chapter 9. The Price of Betrayal. 1 year later, Michael Sullivan, now Michael Hayes, having legally changed his name to his mother's maiden name, stood outside his father's office building, wrestling with a decision that would define the rest of his life. In his jacket pocket was a letter he'd written and rewritten dozens of times, each version a different attempt to find words that might bridge the impossible gulf between them. The past year had been a masterclass in humility. Working security for a downtown office building, Michael had watched Seattle's elite come and go, knowing that he'd once been part of their world and understanding that he never would be again. His mother worked 12-hour days at the accounting firm, her hands rough from work she'd never imagined doing. Jennifer had transferred to University of Washington as a part-time student, taking 6 years to complete a degree that should have taken 4. They'd survived, but survival was a far cry from the life they'd once lived. Every day brought reminders of what they'd lost, not just the money and status, but the sense of security that came from being part of something larger than themselves. They'd been cast out from the protection of the Sullivan name, forced to make their own way in a world that offered no second chances for their kind of betrayal. But it was something else that brought Michael to his father's building on this gray Seattle morning. 3 days earlier, he'd received a call from the Seattle Police Department. Diana Hayes, formerly Diana Sullivan, had been found dead in her apartment, apparently from an overdose of prescription pain medication. The investigation was ongoing, but initial reports suggested suicide. The note she'd left was brief. I destroyed everything good in my life for excitement that lasted 8 months. I can't live with what I've become. Tell Michael and Jennifer that I'm sorry for all of it. Tell Robert that he was right about everything. Michael and Jennifer had buried their mother in a small ceremony attended by fewer than 20 people. Rob hadn't come. He hadn't sent flowers. He hadn't acknowledged her death in any way. To him, Diana Sullivan had died the day he discovered her betrayal. The woman who'd overdosed in a Capitol Hill studio apartment was a stranger who'd once worn his wife's face. Now Michael stood outside his father's building, knowing that this would likely be his last chance to reach the man who'd given him everything and taken it all away. The letter in his pocket wasn't an attempt at reconciliation. That ship had sailed long ago. It was something else, an acknowledgement, an acceptance, a final goodbye. The security guard at the front desk recognized him despite the name change and the year of hard living that had aged him beyond his 21 years. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, but you're not authorized to go upstairs. I know. Could you give this to him? Michael handed over the sealed envelope. Tell him it's from Michael. He'll know what it means. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave Michael time to think about the words he'd finally settled on. Not apologies, those were meaningless now. Not pleas for forgiveness. He understood that ship had sailed. Just acknowledgement of what had happened and why. Rob was in a meeting with federal prosecutors when Miranda delivered the envelope. He recognized his son's handwriting immediately, though the careful script had been replaced by the hurried scrawl of someone who'd learned to write quickly between shifts at menial jobs. Excuse me for a moment, Rob told the prosecutors, stepping into his private office to read the letter. Dad, Mom is dead. I thought you should know, even though I understand why you won't care. She killed herself 3 days ago. The note she left said you were right about everything. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or money or a second chance. I understand that those things don't exist for people like us. I'm writing because I finally understand what you tried to teach us about consequences and character and the difference between family and blood relatives. You were right. We weren't your family. Family doesn't betray each other for money and excitement. Family doesn't choose strangers over the people who sacrificed everything for them. Family doesn't sell out their father's life work for the approval of a man who saw them as useful tools. We were your children by accident of birth, but we never earned the right to be your family. When the test came, we failed completely. We showed you exactly who we really were, and it wasn't good enough to deserve your name or your trust or your protection. I know you're successful now. I heard about the government contracts and the new offices and the international expansion. I'm glad. You deserved better than what we gave you. You deserved children who understood the value of what you provided, who honored your sacrifice, who chose loyalty over excitement when the moment came. I work security now. Minimum wage, overnight shifts, watching empty buildings. It's honest work, which is more than I can say for anything I did when I carried your name. Jennifer is in school, paying her own way, earning what she gets instead of having it handed to her. We're learning what you tried to teach us about the value of things that are earned rather than given. I don't expect an answer to this letter. I don't expect anything from you ever again. I just wanted you to know that we finally understand what we threw away. We finally understand what you really offered us and what we chose instead. You were a good father to children who didn't deserve you. You were a loyal husband to a wife who betrayed you. You were a provider and protector to people who sold you out for trinkets from a stranger. The Sullivan name meant something because you made it mean something. We never earned the right to carry it, and we proved that when we chose Trevor Hartwell's money over your trust. I'm sorry for what we cost you. Not sorry in the way children say when they break something valuable, but sorry in the way adults say when they understand the full weight of their choices and the permanent nature of their consequences. We destroyed your family, Dad. But maybe that was necessary for you to build something better. Something based on merit instead of obligation. Something that can't be betrayed because it's built on choice instead of accident. I hope you find the family you deserve. People who understand loyalty and sacrifice and the true meaning of honor. People who would choose you over money and excitement and the promises of strangers. We weren't those people. We never were. Michael. Rob read the letter twice, then walked to his window overlooking Elliott Bay. The federal prosecutors were waiting in his conference room to discuss a new international assignment that would expand his company's reach into Europe and Asia. Catherine Morrison-Shun's husband had proven to be an excellent professional contact, opening doors that led to opportunities Rob had never imagined. His life had been rebuilt on a foundation of merit and mutual respect rather than blood obligation and unearned loyalty. The people in his orbit now were there because they'd proven their worth, demonstrated their reliability, earned their place through competence and character. It was a better life than the one he'd lost. Cleaner, more honest, more sustainable. His phone buzzed with a reminder about the afternoon meeting. Rob folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, then returned to the conference room where prosecutors and federal agents were waiting to discuss operations that would protect national security and destroy the kind of people who traded secrets for personal gain. People like Trevor Hartwell. People like Diana Sullivan. People like the children who'd once carried his name but had never earned the right to call him family. In the 42nd floor conference room, Rob Sullivan outlined strategies for identifying and neutralizing threats to national security. Outside the windows, Seattle stretched toward the mountains and the sea, a city built by people who understood that some things were worth protecting and some betrayals demanded permanent consequences. Far below, in the lobby of the building, a young man who'd once been Michael Sullivan walked back into the Seattle rain. He would return to his security job, to his small apartment, to a life built on the simple principle of earning what he received rather than expecting what he wanted. He would never see his father again. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he understood that this wasn't a tragedy, it was justice. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay destroyed. Some families, once shattered, revealed that they'd been built on false foundations from the beginning. Rob Sullivan had lost a wife and 2 children, but he'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that his loyalty and resources and protection would only go to people who deserved them. People who understood that family was something you earned, not something you inherited. The rain fell on Seattle as it always had, washing the city clean for another day of building and growing and proving that some things lasted because they were built on solid ground, while others fell because they'd never had real foundations at all. In his office 42 floors above the street, Rob Sullivan returned to the work of building something that couldn't be betrayed. Something that would last because it was based on choice rather than obligation, on merit rather than sentiment, on loyalty that was earned rather than assumed. The price of betrayal, he learned, was everything. But the reward for refusing to accept it was freedom, the freedom to build something better from the ashes of what should never have been trusted in the first place. Outside his window, the city stretched toward tomorrow, full of possibilities for those strong enough to seize them and wise enough to protect them from those who would betray them for the promise of easy money and temporary excitement. Rob Sullivan had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but he'd learned it completely, permanently, and finally, and that knowledge would serve him well in whatever came next. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.